The dusty horizon shimmered under the punishing sun as the town of Willow Creek bustled, with the clatter of wagon wheels, sharp laughter, and the clang of metal against wood. But none of that noise softened the lonely figure of the elderly woman who shuffled slowly toward the trading post, clutching a small cloth pouch like it was the last thing she owned on God's green earth. Her grey shawl was worn thin, and though her gaze carried decades of hardship, every passerby seemed to miss the quiet dignity in her eyes. Folks in town whispered stories that she was poor, that she lived alone on the outskirts after losing her family, that she barely survived last winter, and so people excused themselves from kindness by saying she didn't have much time left anyway. As she stepped into the trading post, the glow from the afternoon sun highlighted the dust floating in the air, turning it golden like stars suspended in daylight. The three cowboys behind the counter stopped, talking and smirking just long enough to glance at her before resuming their noisy jokes. The shopkeeper scribbled numbers on a ledger, barely lifting his eyes. She waited quietly, holding the small packet of herbs she'd dried herself, intending to trade for a little flour and maybe a bit of salt. Her voice, soft but steady, asked for help, but her words were brushed aside as though they weighed less than the dust settling on the counter. The cowboys chuckled under their breath, calling her Granny Ghost, making fun of her patched dress and silver bun. Still, she said nothing cruel back. She merely waited, patient as the wind-worn stones outside. Minutes stretched painfully. She tightened her grip on her herbs as her heart beat, thudded with nervous embarrassment. Then, just as mockery reached its peak, the door creaked open again. A young cowboy hand, lean and dusty, stepped inside. Clint Walker, a ranch helper barely making a nickel a week, but with a heart richer than any man in town. He removed his hat respectfully when he saw her and greeted her like she was a lady of honor, not someone forgotten by the world. When he realized she wasn't being served, his jaw tightened with irritation. He stepped up to the counter and said firmly, "The lady was here before me." The cowboys rolled their eyes, mocking him now too, calling him poor, claiming he had no right to speak. Clint ignored them and placed a small coin on the counter, insisting the shopkeeper provide whatever she needed. The old woman resisted, insisting she could trade, but Clint gently encouraged her, saying, "Sometimes, ma'am, accepting help is the bravest thing." Finally, she allowed the exchange, her hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the rare warmth of respect. The shopkeeper weighed the herbs, pretending they weren't worth much. Yet Clint paid without complaint. What shocked everyone, however, wasn't the kindness, but what happened next. The shopkeeper, irritated that Clint made him look rude, tossed the woman's new goods toward her, causing the flour bag to spill. Flour burst into the air like winter snow, falling across the floor as the cowboys laughed. Shame burned in her eyes. Clint knelt instantly, gathering what he could, apologizing though he wasn't at fault. Seeing the tears forming at the corners of her eyes awakened something fierce inside him. He stood facing the room and said loudly, "A community ain't measured by its riches, but by how it treats the ones who need help the most." His words silenced the room. The old woman looked up at him, studying him with a gaze that seemed to peer directly into his soul. Then her expression softened into something like gratitude, or maybe recognition. She asked his name. "Clint Walker," he replied. She smiled faintly, her voice suddenly more authoritative as she said, "Clint, would you walk me home? There's something you ought to see." Unsure, but sensing something important, he agreed. The pair stepped out into the warm light, leaving the stunned shop behind. As they walked out of town, the landscape changed from the ordered grid of buildings to wild prairie and fence lines that stretched into forever. She moved slower than him, but with purpose, and Clint, though confused, felt strangely humbled to follow. Soon they reached a weathered gate bearing an iron brand. A sprawling ranch lay beyond. Thousands of acres of open land, cattle grazing under sweeping skies. Clint stopped in disbelief. He knew this ranch. Everyone did. It belonged, or so they believed, to a reclusive old rancher named Alistair Boone, a powerful figure whose land shaped the whole region. But the ranch had become quiet in recent years after the owner's tragic passing. Rumors said no heirs had claimed it, and ownership was under dispute. The old woman pushed the gate open. "This place," she whispered with a strangely proud breath, "was my husband's." Clint stared at her with new eyes, not as a stranger in rags, but as the widow of the richest landowner in Willow Creek. She turned toward him and added, "And now it is mine." Clint's heart pounded. He hadn't just helped a random poor woman. He had helped the most powerful, yet most neglected soul in the county. The wind rustled the grass like a rising storm, and Clint sensed the world was about to change, in ways the trading post cowboys would never imagine. As they stepped through the gate and followed the fence line toward the ranch house, Clint continued to look around in awe, realizing he was walking across land that stretched farther than his imagination could grasp, yet belonged to someone treated like a nobody by the very community she helped build. The old woman paused at a large stone near the edge of the property, dust lightly swirling at her feet. "My name is Evelyn Boone," she said in a gentle but powerful voice, revealing the truth that would make any ranch hand tremble. Clint's breath caught. He'd heard of the Boones, a family of legacy and whispered legends. Evelyn reached a trembling hand to touch the stone. It was a marker, carved with the name of her husband, Alistair Boone, the man whose life had shaped the entire region. She closed her eyes as if feeling his presence there beside her. "My husband believed in fairness," she said quietly. "He believed that those with much must care for those with little. But after he passed, folks forgot his ways. They forgot kindness." She opened her eyes again, strength returning to her posture like roots digging deeper into the earth. She turned to Clint and said, "Today, you reminded me that good men still exist." Clint flushed, unsure how to take such praise. He wasn't used to compliments. Life had taught him to keep his head low and work hard for every crumb. Evelyn then led him inside the ranch house, where portraits covered the walls and dust coated the furniture like a blanket of time. She opened a drawer and pulled out legal documents, deeds and ownership papers. Her fingers brushed across them with deep reflection. "I've been alone too long," she admitted. "Those men in town, they think because I wear old clothing, because I'm quiet, that I am weak. But the truth is, Clint, I'm choosing who to trust with this land and its future." Clint staggered backward at the implication. "Ma'am, I'm just a ranch hand." "I ain't got no right." She silenced him with a raise of her hand. "You have the right heart. That's what matters," she continued. "This land will outlive me. It needs someone who cares about people, someone who understands what it means to go without." Her eyes softened as she approached him. "Clint Walker, I want you to help me restore this ranch. Run it the way my husband would have wanted." Clint felt like the ground had vanished beneath him. A future, once filled with dusty uncertainty, now stood bright and possible before him. Still, he doubted his own worth. "Ma'am, I don't know nothing about running something so big." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Neither did my husband at first. But he learned. And so will you." Clint's chest tightened with emotion. He nodded slowly, accepting what felt like a destiny placed into his hands by fate itself. Days passed. Word began spreading after the shopkeeper, curious about Clint escorting the old woman away, followed and discovered who she truly was. Soon townsfolk shuffled nervously around. Evelyn, whenever she came into town, suddenly courteous, suddenly eager to serve her. But she remembered every face that turned away in her time of need. She remained polite but distant, kind, yet wise to false hearts. And then came the day she returned to the trading post, Clint by her side this time, no longer invisible. The same cowboys who'd laughed now stood stiff as fence posts, hats in trembling hands. Evelyn looked at them calmly and said, "It's easy to mock someone when you think they have nothing. But remember, wealth comes and goes. Character does not. Shame flushed their cheeks deeper than any sunburn. She purchased goods that day, Clint paying from the ranch accounts, and walked out with grace they could only hope to imitate. That evening, back at the ranch, Evelyn watched the sunset with Clint on the porch. Orange and gold smeared across the sky like a painting. "You've given me hope again," she whispered. "And you, ma'am," Clint said softly, "have given me something to believe in." Months turned to years. The ranch flourished. Workers were treated fairly, hungry families were fed, and the Boone legacy became one of compassion once more, all thanks to a cowboy who refused to ignore someone in need. Before Evelyn passed peacefully in her sleep many years later, she signed the final documents transferring the entire Boone Ranch, every acre, to Clint Walker. And on that day, Willow Creek learned a lesson carved deeper than any cattle brand: never underestimate the quiet ones, never judge by appearances, and never fail to show kindness. Because the person you ignore might just own the world you walk upon. Clint often stood on that same porch, watching the horizon, remembering the moment that changed his life. And whenever a stranger came to town, poor, tired, or overlooked, he made sure they were seen, welcomed, and helped, because kindness once given freely became the richest inheritance of all.